Now that we've refreshed our understanding of the cloud, let's talk now about some important cloud security considerations. Now, just because we're moving to the cloud, that doesn't mean we have reduced our security threats. In fact, we've introduced some new types of threats. So we have still concerns about data breaches, hacked environments, exploited system vulnerabilities, account hijacking. We're still concerned about things like data loss and data exfiltration. But we're also concerned now with things like cloud service abuses and hacked interfaces and denial of service attacks and the whole nature of shared technologies. So the cloud doesn't mitigate our security risks. Second of all, security best practices dictate that mission critical applications and data, even in the cloud, really should be isolated and in secure segments on the network. This is the zero trust principle of never trust, but always verify. Now, on your physical network, zero trust is relatively straightforward to accomplish, using firewalls and policies based on applications and user identity. But in cloud computing environments, it becomes harder because the cloud relies on shared resources. This brings us to our third consideration, and that's spinning up a new VM in an infrastructure as a service environment or in your private cloud. Well, that's relatively easy. And that can be done in a matter of minutes. But that's because the cloud is dynamic and automated. But what about security? Is our security also dynamic and automated? You see, configuring security for a workload can be very difficult in many organizations. Business processes may dictate policy changes go through a time-consuming approval process or change control process. And because of the nature of the cloud, many enterprises will need to adapt their security processes to keep up. You might be thinking, why not just do what we do in the data center? Well, there are some specific limitations of data center security being translated into the cloud. Some on-premise security approaches will work, but others will not, especially if your current security in your data center has what is known as limited visibility, which is often the case. You see, the traditional firewall, the stateful firewall, it's a port first, ask questions later type of approach. And that's not always going to work, especially because a lot of applications use a variety of different ports. This limited visibility leads to the next limitation of data center type of security, and that is limited control over unknown traffic. Many data centers don't manage unknown traffic, and this puts them into a high-risk category, and certainly something we don't want to translate into the cloud. Another problem is the lack of policy reconciliation tools. You see, the data center often will use and rely on multiple security solutions, and each one has their own set of policies. Some of them might be a positive model, and some of them might rely on negative enforcement as their model. A firewall appliance and another component for application control, and another for IPS, and another for anti-malware, etc., etc. Now, this means companies have a lot of policies on different devices, and they have to maintain them, and they don't always work well together. That's because they're not natively integrated, and that complexity doesn't translate well into the cloud. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, many data centers suffer from a cumbersome security policy update process. So what do we need? Well, the cloud requires that we look at security solutions that are adaptable, integrated, follow that zero trust principle, and that are also automated and centralized. Let's have a look at each one of these. By adaptable, I mean that we're talking about something that's more than the static port-based firewall. Even a virtualized version of the typical firewall is not going to work well for us in the cloud because it's not as dynamic or intelligent. For example, let's say you want to secure your private cloud. Because of the virtualized nature of the private cloud, application workloads will often move from one host to another, so your security solution has to be able to adapt to those changing network conditions. Second of all, adaptable also means you're providing protections that can keep up with the different types of traffic. You see, in a virtualized data center and in the cloud, we refer to traffic as either north and south or as east and west. North and south traffic is inbound and outbound, while east and west is within the network itself, either within your private cloud, your private virtualized data center, or within the tiers of the public cloud. Cloud-based security solutions need to protect both types of traffic. Now that brings us to integrated. Now by integrated, I mean you want a security solution that plays well together. You want compatible solutions, intelligent solutions. So for example, your cloud-based security solution needs to be application aware, and it needs to minimize your administration. A good example of this would be, say, a SaaS security solution, which specializes in protecting well-known SaaS applications. Or perhaps the SaaS application itself might have an integrated security feature. Another example for integrated security would be at the infrastructure as a service level or the private cloud. And here what we're talking about is a virtualized next generation firewall, not your port-based firewall, but an application aware firewall. And what's good about these types of firewalls is that they often can help you reduce the number of policies you have to maintain. Where in the data center you have a lot of different appliances providing different security features, some of these firewalls have a lot of those features built into them with the same software, and that reduces the number of security policy rules that you have to maintain, and that's going to make your policy management overall more effective and more intelligent. Some of these solutions even integrate with the hypervisor and the platform itself, and that's going to yield its own key advantages. That brings us to zero trust. Now, by zero trust, we don't trust any one part of our network. We don't blindly trust our connections to the cloud or the applications and traffic within the cloud or the endpoint traffic. Instead, we're going to isolate and we're going to protect. For example, let's say we have a hybrid cloud connection. On one hand, we have our private virtualized data center that's operating as a private cloud, and on the other hand, we're connected to a public cloud provider. In this case, we want to, of course, ensure that the connection between the two are protected, monitored, and we have visibility there. Another example of zero trust is within those networks themselves, within the virtual machines and within the application. So application to application level type of traffic. That's east-west traffic, remember, and we want to protect that because, well, we can control that traffic and we can require only allowed applications to flow inside our data center between our VMs and our networks. This is going to give us several benefits. It's going to reduce lateral threat movement. It's going to stop unknown threats from being even internally sourced within our data center. And it's also going to help us protect against data threats because it will prevent and block anti-spyware communications to our outside world. There's also another benefit to using virtualized firewalls for east-west protection, and that is the unprecedented traffic and threat visibility that it provides us. Once our traffic logs and threat logs are turned on, that VM to VM or internal communications become highly visible. And so our cloud communications and our virtual data centers, well, our awareness about the traffic occurring in those locations just gets increased, and we have a greater ability to prevent DOS types of attacks and data filtering or exfiltration types of attacks. Here's one last example you may want to consider to provide protection at your endpoint, and this includes mobile devices. Companies that implement a mobile device management solution and secure those personally owned device connections, well, they're also protecting their corporate resources, even resources stored in the cloud. These resources are protected then from unauthorized data extractions as well as malicious infections. So in this case, we're extending our zero trust principle not just within our networks and within the cloud, but also to the endpoints themselves. Finally, we want an automated solution, which means we don't want to use security solutions of the past, but one that is tailored for the cloud and one that is centralized so it can keep up. For example, if you want to implement a firewall as a virtual machine into your private cloud, you'll also want to automatically scale it out like your other workloads so it can keep up. You will also want to centralize your control and management over those security policies. A good security solution in the cloud comes with good tools. So there you have it. There's an overview and a short list of principles that you want to look for when considering cloud security. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but provide you some guidelines and some information, and something to think about when you're thinking about the cloud and you're thinking about security. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I sure enjoyed spending time with you. Hope to see you again.